Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dynamics Fortnite Fridays.
Where we cover everything dynamics, great and small. Well, it's like the end of June for us. It's like the year's half over, Bart.
I know. Well,
Yeah,
calendar year, fiscal year is ending in a few
yeah,
days. So,
that's right. Microsoft's fiscal. It's like that's pretty much where the sun goes around. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, a lot of content today. But before we get to
always.
content, do we have a dad joke? Do you have something that's seasonal even? You've been
Well,
doing that a lot lately. Yeah.
of course, they have to have some sort of a theme.
Okay.
Well, believe it or not, tomorrow is a birthday of mine. And so
Ooh.
I am guaranteed to get something. What do you think that is?
Um, a birthday gift, cake. Tomorrow is just like this June 28th. I don't know. Tell me.
Older.
Okay. So, all righty.
Well, all righty,
All right.
right.
All righty. So let's just see if I have anything worse than this. And I'm going to go back to my dad jokes cards. And I still have a bunch left of these. So we'll be doing this for a while. What do you get from a pampered cow?
Coddled milk?
Close, so close, so
So
close. Spoiled milk.
spoiled milk.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was good. Okay, I'll give that to you. It was just like that was still good. So, anyways, I hope our content's a lot better than our jokes once again. So, what do you got for me, Bart?
Well, let's just get right in here and see what we can come up with. First things first, Empower Platform World. MCP is kind of taking the agentic world by rage, and MCP servers are kind of coming over the horizon just about everywhere you look. But there's a pretty cool one that someone put together an MCP server on the Microsoft Learn documentation to like basically find anything in our documentation with a quick uh, question and gives you a really nice defined outline of it. And the server itself is right out here on GitHub. And so if you are wanting to go, deploy your own and do all those kind of things, then knock yourself out. But the more important thing is they've actually got it deployed with an endpoint. So that helps. And then this is an article that a person wrote on LinkedIn that kind of gives you a step by step. Well, hey, if you just want to use that endpoint to stand up your own Copilot Studio agent that uses this MCP server that's out there on the docks that I actually followed it in about 5 minutes. I had a pretty cool agent that I can actually even quickly show that I just right before the show went in and just said, well, how do I set up the Salesforce Copilot connector that used to be known as a graph connector? It went out, found the documentation, and gave me the step-by-step instructions, along with several of the sources right on our Learn site where it found all the information to summarize all that. So pretty slick to be able to just learn things quickly that you're trying to find. And I know web queries do a pretty good job of this too, but it's kind of fun to see it in the agentic world. Power Pages. Going to be a little bit of news about them in a few different spots, but the first one is similar to what you were able to do in model-driven apps recently, that we can now put the lists that are sort of driven by the lists in model-driven apps on Power Pages and give your users the ability from the page side to do natural language search and filter on those lists. So pretty cool. And then just some instructions on kind of how to use it and what to think about it. So nice update for the Power Pages folks. Why Dataverse is at the center of the agentic world. So there's a pretty good article to be honest, but really when it comes down to it, I'm just going to scroll down and the money comes in at this slide. So you've got all these things going on with autonomous agents where the triggers and business events and the orchestrator has to go out and do things and find data and take actions and make UIs show up as parts of apps and use model context protocol. Well, Dataverse is what really can empower and allow all of those things to operate on a secure, high performance data platform that can store both relational data and unstructured data all in the same place with the same security model, same access to it with a rich API layer to just make all of that stuff come to life easily. So go read the whole article, but that is my summary of what's going on. PowerFX, the language behind especially Canvas apps, but several places throughout the rest of the Power Platform, just got some nice updates. So enhanced component properties have been out there in preview for a while. They are finally generally available, so use them. They can also be part of a component library, so that's kind of nice. User-defined functions. They had been in the experimental place for quite a while, but they have now moved into preview, so they're getting much closer to GA, and we're expecting GA in the not terribly distant future. User-defined functions can be super helpful. We also have user-defined types, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So when you were working with user-defined functions and working with the JSON, parse JSON function especially, that you started having to worry a lot more about data types. And when we didn't have one, we used to just call whatever came through as the untyped object. And we've decided that was an interesting name, but it's not as good as what we use in other places, like in C#, where we just call that object dynamic. And that is happening now, that we are renaming the untyped object dynamic. And so that's one thing that you'll have to be aware of, but most of the time, it doesn't really show up in places that people are using it unless you're making a user-defined function or a user-defined type. So imagine covering this when we're talking about those other things. So as that user-defined type, these are the types that you can now define, and void is going away. So that's basically what this one says. If you are pretty heavy into the development with PowerFX, these are pretty important to you. For your average maker, that probably is not going to get used that often. If you are thinking about going big with some Copilot Studio agents, whether it's an army of them or a single agent that does a lot of things, one of the biggest questions people have had is, how can I get some sort of an estimate of what this thing's going to cost me? Well, we finally have a nice estimator all put together. And one of the things that's really cool is if you've been using it for a while, you can just point this estimator at the telemetry. It'll go look at all the things it needs to know and do a prediction based on what it's seen for trends in your telemetry. You give it a couple more assumptions. But if you don't have that, you can always just say, well, I'm going to put all the stuff in that it needs to know in order to calculate some other things. So nice that this is here. And just as a reminder, it's fairly easy to get to, aka.ms/ and you'll hear this all over the place. MCS is the kind of known acronym for now anyway of Microsoft Copilot Studio. Used to be Microsoft Consulting Services, so some people get confused, but it is now Copilot Studio's acronym. So MCS-estimator. So use that to help figure out how much one will probably cost you. This is a blog post by a pretty prolific Power Apps developer who's spending a little more time in Copilot Studio these days, and I thought this was really helpful. I had not noticed this new feature in Copilot Studio, that when you go out and you ask a question, one of the things that you have always been able to do is just click on Identify and choose one of the entities that's been defined for Copilot Studio, and it will help figure out if someone has put in anything in the conversation window that matches one of the entities that you've defined. Well, now instead of having to just choose an entity, you can say, well, I want the options to be able to be something that is contained in one of many different entities, up to 5 of them. And so when you choose that, you then get to go pick the ones, and you can even define them dynamically with things like regex if you need to. So pretty nice blog post, just giving you some instructions on where that would be helpful and how to do it. So take advantage of that's going to help you build an agent that's a little bit more sophisticated. This next one is in the model-driven app world. So if you are an app maker making model-driven apps, which all of the Dynamics customer engagement stack is, and more of the F&O stack is landing in these days, that we have a new couple of things. One is Dataverse is allowing for agent APIs to either execute an event that calls a topic that's one of the agent topics in the defined agent in Copilot Studio, or send in a prompt. So that's ways you can basically just send information from your model-driven app and the APIs of Dataverse into the agent. And then you can get the response back and put that into the model-driven app form. And this is a new thing called a response component. And that will be a way you can display what comes back from your triggering, either sending the prompt or just calling the topic directly with some data. And whatever it sends back, you can then format and put into a pretty form that knows this came back from a Copilot Studio agent. So pretty cool update there to give you even more ways to put kind of UI and other process around some of these agentic capabilities and put it right in the way users are getting stuff done. Power Pages has its own action center. And that's been there for a little while, but it is now generally available. So when you go into the Power Pages homepage, you can now click on the Action Center, and it will give you lots of recommendations of things that you could be doing to make your various pages not expire. Or if it's inactive, you might want to reactivate it if it shouldn't have gone inactive. Or if you don't have the CDN on, or you don't have the WAF turned on, or you've got certificates that are about to expire. There's just all kinds of things that this is helping to monitor and to sort of put them right in front of you in this action center saying, hey, there's things you probably better do if you want to keep your pages healthy. I thought that was pretty nice, and it's all generally available now. These last three are things that got logged in the M365 notifications. I can't think of the name of them all of a sudden, but one of those is super helpful for people who are trying to govern Copilot Studio agents. And there is now going to be there is in preview a PowerShell command that is going to put a Copilot Studio agent in quarantine so that it can't be used, but it could still go be modified, and you can just release the quarantine. Right now, that is PowerShell only. And right now it is in preview. We're assuming that is going to make it to general availability on the 15th. But for those of you governing agents, big step forward to give you a little more control. Find it. If it's not meeting whatever standards you have, quarantine it. Next thing, in the prompts area, kind of the AI prompts of Power Platform can be used as part of an agent or standalone as part of something you can call from an app or call from an automation or whatever else. But these prompts have been built for a while with GPT-4o as the default AI that runs the prompt that you create and spits out the results. Well, starting 2 days ago, it just switched to make 4.1 the new model that is going to be running. Same price. You can change back if you want to. So just know that if you make a new prompt, it will be using 4.1 mini instead of 4.0 mini as the default engine. Of course, you can still change those up, and you can still call all the models from Foundry if you have Foundry models and all that stuff too, but 4.1 is now the default. Last one, agents. When you deploy a Copilot Studio agent, the thing that gets consumed by that agent and that you have to have enough of are messages. And you can either do pay-as-you-go or you can buy message packs and allocate them out. Well, we have never had the ability to say, but I need to make sure that this agent never goes over X number of messages because I've got 15 agents in an environment and I had to deploy the messages to cover all 15 agents out there, but I can't keep one of them from consuming the whole thing. Well, now you can. You can actually go in and from among those 15 agents, you can say, these three, you don't get to really group them. You still have to do it agent by agent as far as I know. I didn't actually go click the buttons on this. But by July 14th, you'll be able to assign that capacity within an environment, not just to the environment, but to be able to do that at the agent level to be even more fine-grained with how you assign those out with capacity limits. So big news for those of you governing and trying to keep costs contained the right way for message consumption on your agents. Last two things. In the customer engagement stack, there was a nice blog post that looks at some different historical events in kind of the technology landscape evolutionary trends and how the things that we learned during those evolutionary shifts might be applying to the AI transformations going on right now for sellers. So the first one is when we moved from on-prem services to cloud computing, we learned some things about security and integration and change management. And here's a lot of how you might do that with the AI today. We went to having to do everything on mobile phones or tablets. Well, security and device management, work-life balance all became issues. And here are things that you might want to worry about on the AI side of things. The social media revolution, content overload, authenticity, metrics misalignment, things you're going to have to worry about in the AI world as well. So I thought this was just kind of interesting to put some of those historical trends in context of what's going on with AI these days in the major transformation that's happening and how we can learn that all those things that we learned in those other transformations still apply. So pay attention to them, and here's how they relate. Last one is if you are running our contact center, whether it's the Dynamics one or the standalone one, the CCaaS capabilities all have some APIs under the covers to be able to schedule callbacks. And the scheduled callback you're probably familiar with. You get put in a queue. Hey, do you want to be called back when the agent's available? The estimated callback time is 30 minutes or whatever. That's some of the stuff we can do, but that's certainly not all. So when you call the API, here's like a sample request that they gave you. But if you wanted to put callback options on a website, the API can render the results, put it on a website, and let somebody choose the time they would like to be called about some topic. Or on a mobile app, if somebody wanted to, instead of just call now, they could click a button that says, I'd like to schedule a call back for the first available insurance adjuster to get a hold of me, or not even the first available, but I would like them to call me at 3:30 or whatever, that you can do those kind of things. Or when escalating, instead of just dumping you into a queue, you could say, if you would rather not get dumped right now, but just be contacted when the person's available and whenever works best that you're on break or whatever, then schedule it. So I thought pretty interesting use cases of when callbacks could be used in different UI modalities and different kind of business processes all called out now. And so that's my updates for this fortnight, Dan. Want to run through yours?
Will do. Is like, I actually found this a lot of those really interesting, right? Just
So
even the history of it, because it's like I've been talking about that all week. I don't know why I've been kind of talking about the history of the internet and how these things are going, and agentic behavior. So kind of timely, I guess, for at least for my world. Yeah. So I not a ton of stuff, but some of the stuff is really kind of interesting. So first of all, wanted to cover some of the commerce runtime, the headless commerce architecture, right? So this is for the commerce scale unit, which is basically, their APIs. It's like, so you can actually, with this commerce unit, right? So you can actually run e-commerce, have the headquarters. You can actually run this regionally and have these scale units at different locations, right? And they kind of sync up and make sure that they, you have performant systems at each of these different geographies. Well, it kind of like lays this out, and it lays out really nicely how it works. And there's a nice little map. It's like if you have this scale unit here, like maybe in Europe, over like in Russia or China, whatever it might be, you might have pop-up stores or headquarters someplace else. Kind of maps that out. But there's 3 different components for this commerce scale unit, right? Or this headless commerce unit. So first of all, there is the consumer APIs, and this uses OData or Open Data Protocol APIs, right, for 365. And so this way you can communicate back and forth. So with that, and then also you can actually have third parties that you might want to integrate with your commerce scale unit go back and forth. You also have the commerce runtime, and this is basically or the CRT is basically a .NET library, right? So it's logics for the clients to consume that information, right? It's also extensible. So if you work with some third party, some third party tax, even though we have some tax integration or some special price, could be anything on that commerce scale unit, right? And there's also the commerce database. Now this is really important because this commerce scale unit can run independently. So we have something called the Commerce Data Exchange. This is to be able to sync information, whether it be sales transactions, pricing information, item master data, all that information back and forth from the headquarters, right? So your POS system is working with all that, with your call center and so on and so forth. And so kind of defines how that actually works. And you run those P jobs or N jobs on headquarters to run that back and forth. Talks a little bit about the the headless commerce integration. But I thought this was a nice succinct article, especially if you're kind of getting into the commerce. I thought that was well written and well done there on that. There's also a nice article here about, building the AI-driven storefront in Dynamics 365 Commerce. Now, kind of talks about, well, brick and mortar, isn't that kind of dying? Well, according to Gartner, it's not, right? 64% of Gen Z, the first generation of digital natives, prefer physical retail experience. I thought that was a really interesting quote because, I like the ease sometimes of going online, but quite frankly, it's like I like the tactile feel. I want to go references, like, if I'm going to like a hardware store, if I'm buying a piece of tool, I actually want to feel it and make sure it works for me. And it's like this kind of validated that the retail is not going away, right? And they say 70% of total retail sales still happen in brick and mortar. So even with having this for the last 20-ish years, it still has the lion's share of retail execution. So basically, it talks about it's going from an older shopping process to a modern shopping process, and it uses copilots for the shopping experience for customers, and then also store agentic behavior to make sure it's like, okay, what's the sales? Is there anything that I need to know? Is there anything that it's like, what's the store revenue? Things like that they linked up to there. So we have copilots for that. There's also kind of discussion on like the faster checkout period, because we rejiggered how we actually do the store checkout and that process. Make sure you don't have to drill through. Because I remember the early iterations when we thought we had a modern fluid design, not using the Fluid 2 design or the Figma design that I thought this like, okay, this is kind of kludgy. It looks really nice and it looks pretty, but it's pretty hard to remember where I need to drill down into a submenu or menu. So it's made sure that it's faster. The line actions happen on the sides, so you're not drilling through different screens and things of that nature on that. Also, for checking out and the capture or payment capture, it just makes it a whole lot easier too. It's like, okay, you give me this much cash. What's the optimal way to give out change to maximize this for some people that don't do math in their head anymore like we used to have? Partial payments and that. So kind of a nice little article talks about the whole the how to build that storefront within commerce, and that's the point of sale system, right? There's also a couple articles here, and I thought this my nice educational ones. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but this is about Business Central. And so this is a Dynamics community article from a guy that actually started out with Business Central and then became a consultant, and talks about how to do inventory counts and physical inventory counts. So large companies, most large companies do cycle counting. Smaller companies, smaller items, is like they kind of do full physical inventory and they shut everything down or their location down for a day or two every year to actually just do the counts and then just make the adjustments on that. But this kind of talks about the evolution. It's like, so if you have a small one, do shelf. What's the best way to do this? Just do shelf number. Make sure you have that from that item on there. And then when you print it out, it's like, you might print it out in order so you can actually go against those shelves and see where these items and actually do the physical count. There's supposed to be 10, there's 9. Let's count it again or do an adjustment onto that for that physical journal card. The next part of this is like, okay, we have, and then that's for small numbers, right? But if you have multiple locations on that, you go to the shelf number with that location on that, right? And so we start out with that, and then if you actually get to the a large number of multiple different locations, we use something called a bin code. So it's like that's the bin that you think that's the slot location on that. And that way you can actually convert anything from the shelf codes to the bin codes. And then going forward with that, if you have that bin code, you can actually start doing cycle counting and start working into that. So you don't have to do full inventory count. So anyways, if you're Business Central and they're not using a full warehouse management add-on to this, I suggest that you read this article. It's pretty nice. This one is just kind of a validation, and I've talked about these over the last couple of shows, what's been happening in the Business Central Wave 1 and Wave 2. But, I talked about adding, product documents to production orders, and it kind of shows and goes through that, and that's a really important one. And I thought so too, because we actually want to see it's like how built, or if we have questions on there or any test results they actually want to put on a document, it's really easy to find instead of putting in a storage in SharePoint or someplace that's difficult to find, especially if you're doing tens of thousands of different work orders with that. It's really nice. And then the second thing, and I'd mentioned this, is reopening a production order. So if you reopen a production order, let's see if we had some outside processing that we didn't get the invoice until 2 weeks later, we can open that up and just put that in there as like a, as a cost into that. But be warned, and this kind of talks about this, and I didn't talk about this when I presented, it's like you can only do it once. So once you reopen it, you can never reopen it again. So it's a once and done on that. So I thought that was worthwhile to talk about. And then this one I thought is really important. And so there's, what's new in June 2025 project operations. Now remember, there's stocked, non-stocked, and light versions of this, right? So where we're putting, and I talked about this in the last show, where we're putting most of our effort into is resource non-stock and light, and not stocked, right? Which used to be the old PMA, project management accounting within finance and supply chain. But it talks about the dual right maps, but there's 3 features on this. One is really, really important. This is kind of it's a pivotal feature of the direction that we're gonna all start recommending some of my customers go to within the choices of the 3. And then there's the other one that's okay, it's just a kind of a helpful utility. And the third one is just help with performance and things we talked about. So the first one is it's like we're allowing stock products and integrated deployments. This is really important. So this is kind of a game changer for project operations for non-stock. So we're now allowing stocked products into this. So what we need to do is it's like, you need to set up dual right into it. And the dual right, first of all, you have the items. But remember, it's like in finance and supply chain, you have variants like color, size, style, configuration. You have warehouse or location dimensions on that. So that might be warehouse, it might be site, it might be if it's batch or lot tracked or things like that. Also, it's like the project integration, how we're going to do the estimates and things like that. So the dual right features are now available for that to integrate those products into this project operations. Then, of course, it talks about the products. That's kind of the base of everything that we do here. So if you have a standard product, fine. But if you have variants in finance and supply chain, it is a item number, and then it's like, there's subtables on there. It's like kind of matched out to what the variants are, color, size, style, configuration. But in the Dataverse world, in project operations, all of those variants come by as a single line item. So just be aware of that. That's going to be very different. It also looks at on-hand inventory. So it doesn't calculate the on-hand inventory in project operations. It does it within the finance and supply chain, and then just gives you that number as it goes across. So that's important to know. Also, the default inventory cost, purchase price, and sales price are uploaded into is those prices for the those items on that. And that's gonna be important for doing the estimates. Okay, so what's the sales price that we're gonna do? What's the markup that we're gonna put on that? And what's the cost? So we can actually look at our profitability on that, and then the inventory carrying costs onto that. So that's important to know for those cost estimates. Project quotations, as you do the project quotations, I've talked about the ease of the project quotations. The lines probably showed about 3 or 4 months ago. There's some updates we've done that. They can be added directly to those line items. Remember, that has been updated to make it really easier, so you don't have to go to those submenus in those line items. Put those on there, and we can look at that. It's like you add the item, it pulls out the sales price, pulls out the cost of that, and then we can see the profitability right there. Also on the project contracts, those lines we put onto those project contracts automatically as long as you need them on there. We can also do purchase orders from that. So make sure the enable purchase orders on project operations for resource non-stock, to make sure they enable those. And then we can actually have purchase orders that are related to that project. So they're tagged to that project, and we can do purchase orders, requisitions, and pull all that through. And then once actually those are posted or accepted, those purchase orders, it does the financial transactions. So we can make sure that we have the correct journaling on that. It does material usage. So just like you do expenses or time or fees on a project, we can also do this with material and do those usage. Again, we have that availability, and it also points out, it's like if you have batches, make sure you match that batch. Now that's going to be important because it looks at a material availability, and it will not allow you to go negative. So if you don't have that item this talks about this a little bit down below. If you don't have that item in stock, it's going to throw out an error on there. It's like this is unavailable, and you can't actually run those transactions. You need to fix it. Make sure you have the right batch or right serial number, right locations, and things. So it does all the journals on there, right, for the actual uses for the project ops. You can actually see what your, what the execution is, the budget, and all the postings onto that. And then, of course, for the recalculation and inventory closing, just like you do for inventory. So for this is a game changer feature within project operations non-stock. So it's going to kind of change the direction or some of the recommendations I will use for some of my customers going forward of what type of, of the 3 different flavors of project operations should you be implementing. So that's pretty big. And the second one, I'm not going to drill down into it, but with the Dataverse, there's sometimes you can get some synchronization issues in there, right? So you can initiate a resync of actuals or transactions on those. You can resync the generations for the posting or the integration journal lines, so or anything that's out of sync, right? So the project that weren't posted on there, right? So if the actuals weren't synced there, or or the invoice lines weren't created and they need to be recreated and actually posted into there. So again, that's just utility to help with that. And on this is, financial tags for project financial transactions. I've talked about for journals. Let me back up a little bit. We use tags because we have financial dimensions, and financial dimensions you can put on every single transaction. You'll see the different financial, might be business unit, cost center, might be employer product, whatever it might be. And you can have those posted on there, which is fine until you have a glut of them. And then it takes so much calculating power that running financial statements and posts just become untenable, because some customers maybe just went a little too far with some of those, and they became the performance issues on this. So we changed the financial tags, so you can put financial tags on those. But we started out with just journal entries, a little bit of sales, then we went to purchasing and invoicing and things like that. Now we have them for project, so for project transactions. So now this is for both stock and non-stock versions, of course, the light versions of that. So it's used for reporting. So again, that's a helpful one, but the big one is the products and those integrations into that. So I thought I was pretty excited about that. The next thing is I have a few on finance and supply chain. So, and this is, a few of these are actually on Dynamics community and articles by Crystal Ahrens, or Ahrens, sorry. And she's a very, very good resource for the customers for Dynamics finance and supply chain. So she's an ex-Microsoft from years ago, and worked at I think I first met her at a company out in New York, and now she's working one that's based out of Chicago, but very, very good and skilled. But in this feature, it talks about we have credit limit checks and we use those for sales orders, but no, these are credit limit checks for enterprise asset management work orders. Why that's important, because like if you use enterprise asset management and you have customer owned assets, or maybe your own assets that you actually bill out for service or for break fix or maintenance orders, it checks that. So it's an aggregated system to catch for the credit limits, and not only the sales orders, but it's like, what do they have out? What do they have? Like, they have $10,000 worth of repair coming in, a $9,000 credit limit. It's going to give you that warning that we have to actually do something. So it'll give you a warning or an error. So it basically gives you that holistic visibility across that. So I thought this was a well-written article. Kind of talks about if you actually do that, and a lot more customers are using enterprise asset management for their maintenance and, and billing and streaming and things like that. Also, there's with the enterprise asset management, she also did a nice article within work order management. So we're used to material availability from a production order, or a work order from a production order. Well, what if it's for a service order for an enterprise asset? It's a break fix or a maintenance order on that, right? So before, it's like you had to look, it wouldn't look across like multiple different work orders. You couldn't cross-reference that. It was a little bit more difficult. So basically it aggregates all that demand. So it's filter on the same type of machinery at different customers that are going to be needed for some maintenance that are be done. Well, we're going to make sure that we consolidate that demand. So it gives you a nice visualization of that. So it ties it across all of that. So it's a centralized demand. So, you know, we understand what the item is. We can prioritize that, make sure that we have prioritized procurement orders or transfer orders on that, and basically allows for quick corrective action if something's going to happen. The big thing is integrated with production or master planning. So, you know, MRP, MPS, Materials Requirements Planning, Master Production Scheduling. So it'll create a recommendation, right, or a planned order that you can execute if it sees something. So it'll actually do the planned order. You just click it, and it'll create that purchase order for you. You know, considering all the lead times and inventory and the demand across that. So some of my customers don't necessarily use master planning. They don't know how to use it. It's a super useful tool, and I highly encourage you know, some learning if you don't use that for things like these work orders. So I thought this is a well-written article, and I thought it would be useful for my customers using enterprise asset management. Another quick one is, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Is like there's automated currency revaluations on this. So basically, it's an automation of bank foreign currency valuations, because it's like, you know, currencies fluctuate month to month, right, based upon another currency. So basically, it automates the scheduling, and it helps you set up all the parameters. Sets the schedule for it. Like, you know, it handles the exceptions, notifies you so you can actually fix those. So basically, it's going to give you, you know, more consistency with fewer errors. Make sure you have an easier audit trail, and make sure you're enhancing the compliance. So kind of talks about that and how to make that work. So I thought that was another well done article. And the last one is, like, you know, of traceability. So we released this last year, a traceability module within Dynamics. But, you know, we had trace track, you know, for if you lock control something, that's really nice. But just like if you have a recall, you know, we bought this batch from this vendor, it came into this warehouse, it went into these production orders, we sold it for these sales orders. So we'd be able to track that, but it was kind of kludgy. So we rejiggered this on traceability, which is really nice. We can actually track this across all the orders, all the receiving, all the shipping, all those the customers. But we can actually go outside the four walls, and we can extend that out to if you will, have kind of a blockchain across that. But this also talks about the attributes on that. So it's not only the batch or the serial numbers, which were most commonly used, but, you know, the attributes on here. It's like, okay, if this is for steel rolling, I think. So what's the temperature? Okay, the soak time that's on there. There's just like, you know, that may vary based upon, like, you know, what's the result you're going to get for thickness or the drying times or different attributes on there. So you can actually track all those attributes onto this and give you full traceability all the way through the whole system. And it talks about a real world example. Now, it's two things. First of all, for you know, trace track, if you have any recalls or any issues with something. But also, if you want to do some analysis onto this based upon the attributes that you have with this, you can actually look at the, you know, do a four-way or something, or Pareto, or a Fourier, whatever mathematical things you want to do to actually see what's the cause and effect of these. And I think that's a good way of managing that. So I thought this was a pretty nice article to talk about that and that traceability, and to use it outside of its most traditional usage. So with that, you know, always there's look at your solution updates, as Bart usually talks about. And then if
There's
you
too
want
many
more
of them
detail
to call out.
yeah, there's a lot.
But
yeah,
they're helpful, hopefully, for someone.
Yeah.
I like to kind of keep track of just the innovation in the platform that's constantly getting pushed out.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Dan. Lots of updates in there.
Yeah, it was a lot of good updates. It's like usually at the end of June we don't have as much, but I think it was like we just have the accelerator down, and we're just keep on moving at Microsoft here.
Yeah. Well, thanks all for joining us, and we will see everyone in a fortnight.
See you in 2 weeks.
Enjoy
everybody.
the 4th.
All righty. All right. Looks like Max had to drop for another